debate, and we enjoyed it.
Does that concern you as somebody who supports him?
It doesn't concern me because he has said a whole bunch of different things in the past. That does not define who he was as a president.
When we have a president who doesn't concede an election and tries to stay in power, that violation of his oath of office makes the Constitution worthless.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. There is a time for politics. There is a time for memory. At times, it feels like we've lost our ability to distinguish between the two. But thankfully, this morning, we did just that. Distinguish between clanging political rhetoric and mournful, respectful silence. Just hours after the presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Trump, the two met again and shook hands a second time. But this time, it was in New York City at the 9/11 memorial. The presidential candidates, along with President Biden and Trump's running mate, Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance, all stood together to mark and remember 23 years since the September 11th terrorist atrocities on America. Last night in Philadelphia, Harris and Trump went head-to-head on some of the top issues facing voters and the nation. Both candidates continued to make their case after the debate. Harris greeted supporters at an event in Philadelphia. Trump claimed victory while speaking to reporters in the spin room.
You know, when you win, you don't really necessarily have to do it a second time. So we'll see. But I thought we had a great debate.
Look, this is very much two different visions for our country. Ours, which is a vision for the future, and his, which is about the past and taking us backward. And as I said on the debate stage, we are not going back.
Ed O'Keefe and Finn Gomez join me here at the table. Finn, I want to start with you. We just heard the former president said he had a great debate. Former President Trump is an expert at saying things are great even when they aren't. I haven't talked to a single Republican who would describe last night as great.
Neither have I. In fact, they were insistent. The Trump campaign was insisting prior to this debate, they do not do debate prep. There was not debate prep. Maybe he should have done some preparation prior to the debate. I mean, to me, it sounded more like he winged it. And I think that even if, and clearly Harris was more prepared, he was on his heels throughout the night. And for me, it was a bad night for Donald Trump. And throughout the day, he's been asked if he's going to do another one. It seems like he isn't at this point.
It seems like he isn't. And if you could, Finn, for the benefit of our audience, summarize the sort of best case description of what happened that Republicans are trying to summon up within themselves to put some kind of gloss on what they know was a less than successful evening.
I think that they've been blaming the moderators. You heard that in the spin room with Donald Trump. And by the way, I was in the spin room, and as soon as he walked in, it was a clear indicator. I was talking to a Harris campaign official at the time, and he said, if he's here, it means he lost, right? Mm-hmm. But what the Republicans are saying is that they're blaming the moderators, the ABC moderators, and when you're blaming the umpire, you've lost the game.
Ed O'Keefe, talk to us about preparation, what value it played for the vice president, and what it means or may not mean going forward.
So I ran into her brother-in-law, Tony West, at the train station on the way back into D.C. today, and I said, so all that time spent in Pittsburgh over the weekend was worth it? And he kind of chuckled and said, yeah. And I said, you guys must be really pleased with sort of that split screen, the fact that she was able to react and in essence use her facial expressions to say what she wasn't allowed to say because of her muted microphone. And he kind of laughed and said, yeah, if you know that look, it's a devastating one. And so
they worked on that.
They did. They had staged in this hotel ballroom in Pittsburgh an entire mock setup, which has been done by other candidates before, speaking to preparation and why it's worth doing. And they apparently were playing back the tape for her as they went. And so I think she had a much better sense than previous recent Democratic contenders about that this is a television experience, less an academic exchange between two people. And with tens of millions watching at home, the impressions you make there or that end up in people's Instagram feeds the next morning have far more mileage than some of the things that get said.
To what degree do we know how much Kamala Harris learned from the experience of Hillary Clinton?
Well, we know they spoke over the weekend.
Correct.
And we know that she has been speaking not only with her, but with the Obamas and with others who've dealt with him, obviously with President Biden. So she's getting a lot of incoming on how to deal with him and how they believe he should be campaigned against. And the one thing her team has embraced better than the Biden team, the Harris-Wilmington team versus the Biden-Wilmington team, is you've got to get down there with him. You've got to get inside his head. You've got to raise questions about crowd size and what foreign leaders think of him and the fact that he's facing dozens of federal charges, because you know what will happen. What will happen is what happened last night. He will spend more time focused on his past, on his own personal problem, than on the people watching at home.
I want to play something from the debate, one of many moments that stuck out to many in the audience. Let's play that first one about the former president talking about President Biden.
We have a president that we don't even know if where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they
here.
threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know, is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
It's important to remind the former president, you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me.
One phrase keeps running through my mind as I watch that in other clips, Finn: overmodulated. You're just too loud, Mr. President. And you're not typically that loud. You are, in American political history of the modern vintage, more skilled than most at understanding the medium, understanding television, understanding the amplification that comes through a microphone. When you're that hot, it sounds like you're a little raving.
And ranting, and I think that, initially at the beginning of the debate, you did see that he had sort of this, he was a little more tempered, right? That was part of the strategy. Don't come out too animated, too heated. And, as soon as she started talking about crowd size, it was like, I wasn't going to use bait, but it was. She ensnared him, and
he was
went
triggered.
Right he was triggered, and it was like that whole strategy, like it was lost. And the senior advisor told me, like, they did not want to see angry Trump last night, and he did come out.
I'd argue he's met his television match. Hillary Clinton wasn't this good. Joe Biden's, with all due respect, terrible on television. She's not.
From a different era.
That's why. Different era, and frankly, from a state
Right.
that has no commercial television station and where television wasn't a required element of politicking. But in California,
retail.
But in California,
Right.
it's the only tool you have at your disposal to win statewide. She knows that, and they did a masterful job of preparing her for the performance.
Do you think Doug Emhoff, her husband, helped Doug Emhoff, former entertainment lawyer?
I mean, it's not only him, it's all the people that live around them in Brentwood, in Los Angeles. It's the fact that, again, she has been trained by California-based political operatives for the last 10,
And
12
consultants.
years. Yeah, who know that you've got to be good in television commercials, you've got to be good in television interviews, you've got to be good in public where the footage of you is seen by a television-consuming audience across the biggest state. Look at, Gavin Newsom, Jerry Brown, Ronald Reagan, Pete Wilson, Kamala Harris, Dianne Feinstein, in their day, were very effective television communicators. You have to be if you're from California, and it worked to her advantage last night.
Finn, I was in Michigan last week, and as I said this morning, talking about that piece, we'll have a clip of it later on in this broadcast. The Trump support there remains real and resilient. It's not going to collapse after this debate. What is interesting is, did he add anything to his base support last night?
Did he?
Yes.
To his base support? No, I think he gave
Which was
enough.
one of the goals last night, was to try to add.
It was, but it's also, he was also, part of his strategy last night was supposed to be speaking to those outside of his base. Like, he was also, like, especially in Pennsylvania, you're trying to talk to and appealing to suburban voters, suburban women voters. He did not do that last night. She did a better job of trying to expand her base by speaking outside of her base. But clearly she was talking to moderate Republicans. She was talking to Haley Republicans, McCain Republicans. She talked about being a gun owner. We hadn't heard that since 2019.
By the way.
By the way. And so I think, like, she did a better job of doing that than he did. I mean, to me, it was a stark difference. But the only people that matter, the only people that truly matter in their assessment are those battleground state voters in those 7 battleground states.
Ed O'Keefe, very quickly, observations on that long back and forth over reproductive freedom and how the Harris campaign.
That's what they wanted. They wanted to goad him into that, to get him repeatedly to not answer the question of whether or not he would veto a federal ban. He didn't. they have all the proof they need and all the fodder they can use now in advertising to prove again it remains a big important issue for them.
To create
and one that's going to
memes,
galvanize a lot of voters,
campaign speeches,
including
and
that
advertisements.
Childless cat lady from Nashville who tweeted her support or Instagrammed her support after the show last night.
What's the name?
Taylor.
Oh, Taylor Swift.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, but that's who they're trying to reach, right? And
That
worked.
came in last night in case any of you missed it. Ed O'Keefe, Finn Gomez, thank you very much.
I think it was a typical presidential debate, a lot of interrupting and everything, but I do think that they made some good points, and I think that it did give a lot of people a better decision and a better answer for who to vote.
Our Nicole Killian watched last night's debate in Pennsylvania, Bucks County to be specific, alongside voters with, as you might gather, a wide range of political views on what they heard last night and how it just might affect their vote. That's coming up next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Voters across the country, maybe even you, are reacting to last night's debate. Our Nicole Killian watched it with a group in Pennsylvania.
We are here in Bucks County, which is a critical swing county here in Pennsylvania. It went for President Biden in 2020, but Republican voter registrations are up this cycle, so it could be very competitive come November. The voters we talked to last night didn't necessarily see eye to eye on the debate, but there were a couple of things that they agreed on. They mostly felt that the candidates could have done more to talk about policy and should have been less on the attack. Here's their impressions.
By a show of hands, how many of you think that Vice President Harris won this debate?
I would say so.
Why do you raise your hand?
Definitely because Vice President Kamala Harris is definitely a better speaker than Donald Trump. That's why I would say that she would probably have won the debate itself.
No one won the debate, but I would say if people believe in thinking that whatever they saw from Kamala is real, then yes, Kamala won the debate. But if people see through that facade, I think Trump won the debate.
What are you taking away with you after tonight's debate?
I think it was a typical presidential debate, a lot of interrupting and everything, but I do think that they made some good points, and I think that it did give a lot of people a better decision and a better answer for who to vote for.
They both made some interesting points. However, I would like to see a lot more policies, and that wasn't discussed. So I would like another one.
I'm reinforced in my belief that he is an existential threat to our democracy. He just the other day stood up and proudly proclaimed in front of all the cameras and the people that if he got elected, we'd never have to go vote again. This will be the last election. You'll never have to vote again. As he put it, I'll have things so fixed, you'll never have to vote again. He's not kidding. He means it.
There were a number of key moments that the voters responded to, whether that was the candidates' exchanges over the economy, immigration, reproductive rights. But they also said that they wanted to hear more about some of the issues that didn't come up, like what the candidates would do to address veterans and some of their issues, and what they might do to bring down the national debt. For that reason, they said they hope there's a second debate. Major?
Nicole Killian, thank you very much. Trivia question for you. When was the last time presidential candidate of a major party won Michigan but failed to capture the necessary 270 electoral votes to become president? If your guess is John Kerry in the year 2004, you have our compliments because you are correct. CBS News polling has the state in a dead heat. I went to Michigan to grab 3 meals and talk to voters. Here's just a little bit of what I heard. Are you a previous Trump supporter?
The first year he won in 2016, I was not.
Did you vote for Hillary?
I did vote for Hillary, but I
Okay.
cried when she did not win.
Okay. Then what happened?
And then I just felt like he did a good job.
Would you say Harris excites you in any way?
I like her optimism. She reflects more of what I see.
I'll vote for Harris. Yeah.
Sounds kind of meh, though.
I'm a pretty passionate person, and I'm not passionate about either of them.
You can watch my full piece, 3 meals, on the issues that matter most to voters across Michigan heading to November's election. Just head to cbsnews.com and you can see all of it. Coming up, we will be joined by Ohio Governor Mike DeWine to discuss former President Trump's false claim last night about immigrants in Ohio, and so much more. That's next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. If you feel like cats are everywhere in this election, you might not be alone. What began with J.D. Vance, the Ohio Republican senator, and his reference to childless cat ladies has now taken a somewhat fascinating turn to former President Trump's claim that migrants, undocumented immigrants, in Springfield, Ohio, are eating pets. The team at CBS News confirmed has found absolutely no truth in this assertion. Nevertheless, this is what we heard at last night's debate.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine joins us now from Columbus. Governor, good to see you. You and I have known each other a long time. You may not remember it, but I do. I covered your first campaign for the United States Senate back in 1992. And Governor, I never thought, yes, it's a while ago, I never thought I would ask you a question like this. Is anyone with undocumented status in Ohio, is any legal citizen resident of Ohio eating dogs or cats illegally?
Well, Major, this is something that came up on the internet, and the internet can be quite crazy sometimes. And look, the mayor, Mayor Rue of Springfield, says no, there's no truth in that. They have no evidence of that at all. So I think we go with what the mayor says. He knows his city.
And there is a case in Dayton of a woman with mental health issues being alleged to have eaten a neighbor's cat, but she lived in Ohio, not an immigrant. And my reason of bringing this up, not only because the former president did it, but you have an immigration situation in Springfield. It's a serious one. It's an interesting one. Population about 58,000, about 15 to 20,000 Haitians under temporary protected status in Springfield. A good number of them, as I understand, Governor, have gone through the application process to get temporary work permits, are working, and in some cases relieving kind of a labor shortage there. But there have been other issues, health, some safety issues that you've tried to bring attention to. Would you not prefer, Governor, a more coherent conversation about immigration in Springfield, Ohio than was heard last night on the debate stage?
Well, Major, I think there's a couple things to be said about what's been going on in Springfield. And you pointed out the numbers. You know, when you put 15,000 people on top in a period of a couple years on top of a population of 58,000, that's not just the normal, increase that we expect to see in regard to immigration. This is a massive number of people coming in. And I think it raises a couple questions. For us in Ohio, we're seeing a couple major challenges to go with this. And you're right, these Haitians came in here to work because there were jobs, and they have filled a lot of jobs. And if you talk to the employers, they've done a very, very good job, and they work very, very hard. But it raises a couple questions. One is a health issue. As you know, Haiti is not a country that has very good health care. And since the assassination of the president several years ago, the doctors who were there, most of them have already left. So you've got people coming in from a country that don't really have good health care. And so it raises issues about getting them vaccinated, getting their children vaccinated. So it's put a real pressure on primary care. And so what we announced yesterday was, we're going to try to take some federal dollars if they're eligible. If they're not, we're going to have to spend it ourselves and put about $2.5 million in, to assist the local community to expand that primary health care. The other problem is driving. Again, Haiti is not a country that many people don't drive at all. There aren't that many cars per capita. And people who do drive, the laws in Haiti are very, very different than they are in the United States. My wife, Fran, I've been in Haiti a number of times, and driving is just very, very different. So the challenge is to get driver's training for these individuals so that when they do go on the road, they will be safe. We have a law in Ohio that says that once you turn 18, or if you're over 18, you can get a driver's license in the state with, you have to pass a test, but you don't have to have any driver's training, which is kind of a big loophole in our law, and it's a real problem.
Do you worry at all, Governor, that immigrant community could be under greater jeopardy because of scapegoating language like the nation heard last night?
I think as I talk to the people in Springfield, they're concerned about the issues that I just talked about. But they will tell me these Haitians are working very hard. You know, they're trying to provide for their families. But what the people of Springfield are saying is it's just been so many people come in. It's not what we normally would expect. And frankly, Major, I think the federal government has to start looking at places like this and treat it like you would a natural disaster. If we have a natural disaster in Ohio, we call the federal government, they come in and they do an assessment. And if they think that we don't have the resources in the community or the state to take care of that, then there is help provided. I think we need something like that in regard to when we have real big surges like we've seen in Springfield of immigrants coming in over a relatively short period of time.
Broadly
That's really
speaking,
what we should have. We should have that kind of help from the federal government.
Broadly speaking, Governor, who won last night's debate?
Well, I'm not going to get into that. You know, everybody has their own opinion as they watched it. I think that, you know, look, I think the President Trump, if you look at the issues, the majority of people are going to agree with President Trump on issues more than they are with Vice President Harris. And I think the more he can stick to those issues and talk about his vision for this country, whether it's in the economy, whether it's protecting the border, whether it's national defense, I think the better off that he is going to be as he goes forward. We're obviously in a very close race. Ohio's not close. President Trump is going to win Ohio by a pretty good margin. And what we hope, of course, those of us who are Republican rooting for Bernie Moreno to win that race as well for the United States Senate.
And it's a little hard to find, you mentioned the internet a moment, Governor, where you are exactly on former President Trump. Are you a full-throated endorsee of former President Trump's reelection to the White House?
I've always said, look, I said months and months ago before it was even determined who the nominee would be, I said, look, I'm a Republican. I support the Republican nominee for president, so I certainly support President Trump.
Governor Mike DeWine, Republican of Ohio, thanks so much for your time, sir.
Thanks, Major. Thank you.
As we just discussed with Governor DeWine, despite what former President Trump says, Haitian immigrants aren't eating pets. We will have more on the flimsy social media story that has become a bizarre talking point for the former president. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As we mentioned, former President Trump amplified false claims about migrants eating pets in Ohio. Just never going to get used to saying that, folks. That conspiracy theory has been going viral among some conservatives on some social media platforms. To give us the origin story of this, Jake Rosen joins us now. Jake, the origin story, please.
Right, Major, and thank you for having me. This story and theory, conspiracy theory, originated from a Facebook post that someone claimed that a friend a couple distances away from them saw and heard that migrants in Springfield, Ohio were eating people's cats. That was then shared as video was then taken out of context from other parts of the internet, like you just mentioned, that woman who was having the mental health crisis, and was paired and spread like wildfire yesterday. Across the internet, we saw people like Laura Loomer, the conspiracy theorist who is aligned with Trump and was with him yesterday ahead of the debate. It was shared by J.D. Vance, and it was shared by other people on the right-wing ecosystem, not just on Twitter, but across the far-right internet spectrum. And from that point on, it ended up on the debate stage where former President Trump mentioned it, even admitting to the crowd and to Kamala Harris and the moderators that he heard about it through someone who told him it was on television. So, as you and I have covered, as these lies across, whether it's the election interference cases of 2020 that are unproven and not true or something like this, when the scene is set and the kindling has kind of been scattered, like Donald Trump talking about migrants bringing in crime across the country, bringing in disease, ruining the social fabric of our country, like he said last night. When that stage is set, it's very easy for something like what we saw yesterday on the debate stage to happen, to not just Donald Trump, but to be spread again to the millions of people who were watching that debate.
Jake, I want to ask you about the debate preparation, because I talked to a senior Trump advisor yesterday who said, I'm a little nervous about all the people on the plane, all the people who are bending the former president's ears. I'm afraid there's going to be too much shoved in his direction, and he may latch on to some things that are not, to put it mildly, strategic. Do you think that's part of what happened with this particular viral, that plainly untrue and fantastical story that ended up as fodder in a presidential campaign debate?
Well, it certainly could have been, like I just mentioned, Laura Loomer, a conspiracy theorist on the Trump alignment, really, of the Republican Party, was hired and then not hired by the campaign a couple months ago when Donald Trump really was still in the primary phases of the campaign. She was on the plane with Donald Trump yesterday and was with him again as he commemorated the 9/11 anniversary. She's someone who shared yesterday after the debate that Kamala Harris had an earpiece in, and falsely suggesting that her earrings had an earpiece built into them. Again, another completely untrue theory. But it's people like that who have been brought into the former president's orbit, people like Matt Gaetz who have shared these things, and even his running mate, J.D. Vance, who shared that claim both in Washington, D.C. before he went to the debate, but also defended it in interviews after the debate yesterday. So it's not just kind of these people who may be bending the former president's ear on just the flight, but it's even his running mate who was touting and sharing these theories.
Jake Rosen, thank you very, very much. I want to bring in our political panel, Chuck Rocha and Kevin Sheridan. Chuck, as you might remember, Democratic strategist, senior advisor for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. Kevin, former RNC spokesperson and former senior advisor to Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. Wow, the whole pets thing, okay, the dogs, the cats. Actually, as I understand it, in the Trump campaign tried to mount some fantastical defense last night linked to a Federalist story that actually talked about someone watching someone in Springfield, Ohio. Oh, no, maybe it was Columbus, Ohio. They can't be quite sure, carrying a geese down the street. And that has somehow part of this origin story. Kevin, where are we with this nonsense?
Well, there is such a much better example if you wanted to make the critique that, there's too many migrants in Ohio, overwhelming that town. There's 20,000 of them in a town of 50, 60,000. That's what J.D. Vance has been saying. Donald Trump did not need to latch on to this last night.
And we just had a conversation with the governor of Ohio about that. Yeah. It's a real issue. I'm not denying it's a real issue. I'm saying it's a real issue that needs substantive evaluation.
A real student was killed on a school bus, hit by a migrant who was driving illegally. That's a real issue. That's something that the town is grappling with.
Unquestionably.
And I don't know why he sounded more like he was talking to a right-wing podcast last night, one of my favorite podcasts, but that's not the audience that you are looking for. You're talking to a mixed audience. You're talking to independent voters, and that's who you got to go straight at.
I want to dig in on that just for a second. I promise I'll get to you, Chuck, because last night, as the debate wore on, I felt like I was listening to Donald Trump in a kind of a silo, a place where he feels protected, invoking names of fellow conservative Trumpist travelers in the media. But that's not the audience. They're already the converted. They're already with you.
Yeah, he used Laura Ingraham to fact check something. Look, whatever you think
about
of
world leader Viktor Orban. Okay, he's already on the bus.
I think he was flustered. I think he was getting pummeled by three people, and he did not have his best instincts last night. Did not have probably his worst debate I've ever seen him do. But if he gets a second chance, if they actually commit to another one, they're going to have to look long and hard at who moderates. Maybe you can do it.
Who knows? Chuck Rocha.
I'm just thinking about poor old Jake out there in Ohio getting a call last night being like, hey, Jake, can you run over to Ohio to see if the immigrants over there are eating dogs and cats? Poor Jake. Anyway, he did a great job on reporting. Look, what you just heard here is spin. And that's normally what you do. That's accepted in this business. I do it for a living. And I'm one of the few people who's actually got somebody ready for a presidential debate. I've been backstage. I've been with them. I've been sequestered and said, here's the questions that are going to come. Let's make sure we got something to say last night. And what you saw was a master class from an old Mexican redneck like me who was sitting at home going, oh my God, she just answered the question the way she's supposed to answer the question, which is say what you want to say, no matter what the question is. That's if you're Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
But then she would go a step further and go, when Donald Trump would have a chance to do this spin and say, let's talk about the immigrants, let's talk about this thing, let's talk about policy, to your point, she would bait him and say, you got small hands, or you got a little crowd, or let me talk about where you went to school at the Wharton School. And he would take it every single time. And as a strategist, that's exactly what you want to happen.
Kevin, Democrats are feeling pretty good. You felt very good after a 2012 debate. You felt really good after the first one. I'm gathering.
Oh, yeah.
It can be ephemeral, right?
Mm-hmm. Not the second one.
Right. What is the dynamic when a good debate, and how do you marshal it to make it meaningful in terms of politics and votes?
Well, in this day and age, everything gets clipped, everything gets memed. They will turn the best moments of both sides into ads now. There's not a lot for Donald Trump to hang his hat on.
The ratio of memeability probably favors the vice president.
He did have a good argument on the border. He did have a good argument to close. So he had some moments, but overall, he went for the bait every time, and he just was talking about himself, talking about the past, not talking about defining Kamala Harris, which is what his job last night was.
The meme ratio favors Harris.
Absolutely. But let's go back to this Romney and the way that Romney whooped Obama in that first debate.
First debate, 2012,
folks to remember, not to take you back to something really good, is that Romney got a 4-point bounce. That's the biggest bounce we have seen in the last 12 years. So for folks who are like me and excited and we had a good night, don't expect some giant bounce here. Things are pretty baked in, and we're going to win or lose on the margins. Last night with folks who are trying to make up their mind, quote unquote, about a presidential race, it's about likability, the memes, Taylor Swift's endorsement, little things here and there. Help, it's not one thing. It's the little things that add up.
Her debating skills and her style was very good last night. She did not have any policies to hang her campaign on, though. She did not talk about what she was asked. Are you better off now than 4 years ago?
And if I was a Republican, that's all I would have talked to her about. Like, if I'm doing strategy, I'm a strategist.
And she didn't have an answer for that.
Let me ask you both this, because you've both been in this room and you've both lived on the other side of good and bad debates. My sense has always been that debates are an external event, but they're equally important as an internal event. What does it do for the mechanism of your campaign? What does it do to your donors? What does it do to your volunteer base? What does it do to your internal energy? Am I right about that?
There's one thing you never get back in a campaign, and that's time, because we have a definitive end to this thing in November. And time you can never get back. And the one thing that we live for is money. You've got to have money to talk to people and take that message, whether it's opening offices. I heard Ed O'Keefe earlier talking about how she was raised in California politics and is good on TV. Well, you know who else is good on TV? Donald Trump understands TV as well. So this is getting more money to run more TV commercials. That's why no matter what happens last night, it's about momentum and the amount of money you can raise off of something that you did.
Internally, things feel a bit more glum in the Trump world today than they'd felt 48 hours ago.
I would think so. If anything, it may energize Republican voters because of what they saw, though, in a weird way.
Come to the defense of Trump.
Coming to the defense of Trump, think he got done wrong last night by 3 people on one. If that's the takeaway that some voters get, then they may feel okay. But yeah, the dynamics that went into this, where he didn't prep, where he may be listening to lots of different people, that's going to keep showing up if that's true.
Kevin Sheridan, Chuck Rocha, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Thanks. As we get set to pick a new president, a new book is exploring the rural-urban divide and working-class voters. We'll speak with the author next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A new book explores a range of issues important to Americans from the perspective of a woman who grew up in a working-class family in Kansas. The author of Bone on Bone, Essays on America, by a daughter of the working class, Sarah Smarsh, joins us now. Sarah, it's great to see you. There are many issues you raise in the book. One of the first is that there's a tremendous misunderstanding, amplified by many in my profession, about who working class Americans are, what their concerns are, and the sort of stereotypical orientation that they all must be, at one degree or another, Trumpists. Talk about what your book does to try to recharacterize or refute that.
Sure, and thanks, Major, for having me. So coming from fifth generation Kansas wheat farm as I do, and being surrounded by a community that is much more diverse than it's often portrayed in political lines and ideological lines, and in some places even in along racial lines. I find that this sort of red and blue map that we put up and we call one whole state, this monochrome red that suggests that you cross the state line and suddenly everyone there is wearing a MAGA hat, is not only incorrect, but dangerous, really, in our ability to understand ourselves as a nation and write the course toward a better and more just country.
Is it insulting?
Yeah, I'd say so. And that's partly because of my own political persuasion, which couldn't be further from Trumpism. And that's true of my white working class family as well. I think that all over this country, though, there are political minorities who are erased by the Electoral College, by a winner take all politics, and indeed sometimes by media narratives that are focused on the horse race. And that erasure can range from insulting to, even just ineffectual political strategy on the part of resource investment by a given party, like, let's say, Democrats who say, don't bother going there. I think that returning to what once was considered more of a 50-state strategy, investing in putting some boots on the ground everywhere, knocking on doors and seeing who you find, could go a lot further than people think.
Sarah, you talk pointedly and with some poignancy about poverty. And you explain in the book something that has been said to me by many people in working class conditions: being poor is expensive. It's hard.
That's right. It's expensive and hard. I believe James Baldwin actually maybe wrote precisely that it's expensive to be poor, and that was my experience too. Growing up in that rural community and rural poverty, there are just a lot of if you have to take out a loan, you pay interest. If you don't have good credit, you pay even higher interest. If you've got a beater car and you don't make it to work, then because it broke down or you couldn't afford the gas, then you lose the job, and now you definitely can't afford a new car. There's a sort of it's like a quagmire or a quicksand that's very, very hard to get out of. And as someone who is writing about that from a very personal vantage, as you say, but also someone who's interested in our societal structures, I do believe that those very personal and domestic and intimate outcomes have everything to do with the policies that we do or don't have in this country. And that's why I offer my story up for consideration.
Sarah, deep in the book, you offer some very aggressive and I think valuable advice to those of us in the media about the overuse and the misuse of the word populism and populist. Explain.
Yeah, often in discourse today, the term populism is conflated with conservatism. And in fact, those are not synonyms. Populism is an energy that involves a ground level discontent, usually, and anger pointed toward the top, if you will, not necessarily left or right. So it can definitely be harnessed in either of those directions. In fairly recent political history, we saw, a populist uprising on the left, spearheaded by Senator Bernie Sanders. He didn't ultimately get the nomination in the general election, but those people are still there. Some of them are even white working class folks, and they're nothing if not populist to my mind. But we tend to today be constantly framing populism as the MAGA movement. And that is just one, and to my mind, very dangerous iteration of that sort of political phenomenon.
The title of the book, Bone of the Bone, the author, Sarah Smarsh. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Major.
23 years after 9/11, what does the threat from terrorism look like now for the United States and other countries? We take a closer look at that question next, right here at America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Nearly a quarter of a century ago, al-Qaeda carried out the deadliest terrorist attack in modern global history. America is still coping with that event, psychically, politically, culturally. Terrorism remains an ongoing threat across the world, and experts warn it is an escalating threat in parts of the world. The Global Terrorism Index 2024 report determined there were 3,350 terrorist incidents in 2023 alone. It also found that the number of deaths caused by terrorism increased by 22% compared to the year before. Turning to this year, U.S. Central Command says ISIS, you might remember ISIS, claimed 153 attacks across both Iraq and Syria between January and June. Officials warned back in July ISIS was on pace to more than double the total number of attacks it claimed in 2023. Colin P. Clark joins me now. He is the Director of Research at the Soufan Group. His research focuses on domestic and transnational terrorism, international security, and geopolitics. Colin, it's great to see you. Talk to my audience about two things. One, is ISIS back in a way that we should be more worried about it than the headlines would suggest? And even if it's back, is it anywhere near the strength it was when it was such an irritant in the Obama administration?
Well, the Islamic State isn't back because it never went away. In fact, it's ebbed and flowed in strength over time. The United States and the coalition of allies that it led to defeat the Islamic State was successful in revoking a lot of the physical territory that ISIS once held. But the center of gravity has now shifted from Iraq and Syria to Levant, down to parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and even back to South Asia, with the regrowth of Islamic State Khorasan province, responsible for a number of global terrorist attacks this year, as well as several foil plots in Europe.
And what should policymakers in the United States or Europe be doing about this that they are not yet doing?
Well, we need to continue to invest resources in counterterrorism. There's been a shift in the Beltway, attention moving away from counterterrorism towards what we call great power competition, dealing with a rising China, a revanchist Russia, and a regional threat in Iran and its various proxy groups. We can't take our eye off of the Islamic State, off of Al-Qaeda, off of what's happening in ungoverned spaces and fragile states throughout the world. If we do so, we'll live to regret it. It's the same situation in the lead up to 9/11, 2001, where we thought these groups were contained, that we thought that they were more of a nuisance than anything, and they turned out to be a very pernicious global threat, as we learned that fateful day 23 years ago.
Those of us who covered that fateful day and remember all of the assessments made after the fact came across a phrase that I saw in a recent Max Boot column in the Washington Post, that the lights are blinking red now. It was said pre-9/11 the lights were blinking red. We just didn't see them. Why can't we see them now?
Well, we should see them now. And if you remember back to that time around 9/11, we were told by government officials and policymakers that this would be a long war. And it still is a long war. Our adversaries are committed to the war, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and their various affiliates worldwide. We need to remain committed to combating terrorism in all of its forms and manifestations, not just transnational terrorism, but domestic terrorism and what's happening here on the home front.
Is it possible, Colin, to summarize cleanly ISIS's either territorial, financial, or ideological goals?
In short, the Islamic State seeks to dominate the territory where it operates, but it also wants to conquer. It wants to build a modern-day caliphate where it converts non-Muslims to Muslims, and those that refuse to convert are slaughtered. Thankfully, we're never going to be back to a place where ISIS is able to control large swaths of territory in the heart of the Middle East as it did several years ago. It once controlled territory the size of Great Britain. The United States is not going to allow that to happen, but at the same time, there's other parts of the world, the Sahel and parts of West Africa, parts of South and Central Asia that are now becoming terrorist havens once again. And this is going to come back to bite the United States if we don't remain on the offense.
Colin P. Clark, thank you. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.